Welcome to the Reach College Podcast with your speaker, Pastor Taylor Gabbert.
They formed their faith in their image. But if that's what your faith is built on, it doesn't cut it. In 1955, there's a guy by the name of James Warren Jones. He was a pastor. He was a pastor in the Christian church. And in 1955, he started something called the People's Temple, or would later be known as the People's Temple. Started that in 1955, and he began to shape the doctrine of that church really in his image. He began to conduct healings, miraculous events. Turned out later that a lot of them were hoaxes. He actually drugged a woman unconscious, put a cast on her arm, and then later at a healing event took the cast off her arm and told her that he had healed her broken arm. And she was shocked. Her broken arm was healed. And that was the kind of stuff he would pull on a regular basis. He claimed that he had divinity in himself, that he was divine. He claimed that he could prophesy, could tell the future. And he began to, as he shaped Christianity, he began to shape it around this narrative of the enemy. And we talk about the enemy some. We talk about the spiritual enemy. We talk about sin. But for Jim Jones, the enemy was the Nazis, the KKK. They're after us. These people that are coming to get us. And eventually it became the government. The government's out to get us. And he scared his followers into following his message more closely because they believed that they were under threat, imminent attack. And then he began to shape the image of his congregation towards socialism. He developed a commune where they lived together in California, and they shared everything. And slowly, as he shaped the image of Christianity to be in his image, he began then to rely on his strength to make sure that it was followed. He began to control his people in every aspect of their life. He used fear, he used manipulation, he abused people with violence, starvation, and even sexually. And he was constantly micromanaging even the thoughts of his followers. And then in 1977, as more and more scrutiny came on his, what was clearly at this point a cult, they moved their commune to Guyana, and they exited the United States. They escaped. And they started living in this communal socialist society in another country. Well, in 1978, after increased drug abuse, he was basically totally off the rails. He would have, he would start sirens in the middle of the night saying that they were under attack, and have some of his closest followers go into the woods around their commune and fire gunshots. And then they would go into the center pavilion and they would pray and worship, sometimes for days, to fight off the attacks that they were under. Eventually he killed a senator who was going to expose a lot of what was going on in his community. And then immediately after that, he distributed Flavor Aid, which I didn't know was a thing. It's like a version of Kool-Aid, mixed with cyanide. And 909 people in his community committed suicide together. Now, he had done distributions of this kind of drink before, and there's a chance that some of those people thought that it was another kind of false mass suicide, because they had drank Kool-Aid before and nothing had happened. But the vast majority of those people, he said, don't be afraid of death. Don't be afraid. It's just passing into the next phase of human existence, and they went with him. It's more sad when you realize that a lot of the people he recruited from inside of churches. He went to churches and preached conventions in the early days of his ministry and stole attenders from congregations to follow him in his self-made personal religion. If you don't know God, if you don't know God personally, who He really is, you can be fooled by lies about Him. Somebody can convince you of something that God has or hasn't said that's actually contrary to what God has actually said. But if you don't know this, how will you know if they're lying? See, Christianity is in Christ's image. It's not in the image of any given pastor or any given leader. If you notice, the trend with all cults is that they wrap their religion around themselves. They don't point to Christ. Christ is also gentle and loving. He's not abusive and manipulative. Now, I'm sorry if you've been abused in a church, but I can assure you that that is the product of damaged people, not the product of Jesus Christ Himself. Christ gives you Himself. Sin leaves you empty-handed. Sin leaves you so empty-handed sometimes it takes you all the way to death. And in the case of Jonestown, Jim Jones took all of his followers all the way to death. And he did it all in God's name. He committed evil and blamed God for that evil. We're in a series on Judges. Last time I preached was 4 weeks ago. Sam did a series on Asa recently out of 2 Chronicles. And we're going to pick back up where we left off. The last thing we saw was Samson. Now, Samson concludes this downward spiral of the Judges. There's this cycle that we see falling apart in the book of Judges. We start off with judges who are at least attempting and kind of valiant in some way, and we degrade all the way to Samson, who's actively stealing glory from God. The worst judge has one good moment in his entire life, and it's the moment of his death. Right now, the themes in Judges are, one is the continued Canaanization of God's people. They're supposed to be holy and separate. See, as Christians, we're supposed to look different than the world. But the book of Judges is showing us this downward spiral of God's people to look just like the world around them. Just like the Canaanites, who He sent judgment on because of their evil deeds. And they had begun to look just like them. On top of that, the second theme is that they had no king. Now, there's a way you can look at the book of Judges as a pro-monarchy book where it's justifying that then they get Saul and then they get David. I don't think that's what's happening. I think the book of Judges is an argument that they need the king that they were always supposed to have. See, because the nation of Israel had been told that their king was Yahweh, the one true God. And what happens when you get to 1 Samuel and they finally say, we want a king, is that they've learned the lesson of Judges that they need a king, and yet they miss who the king is supposed to be. They get all the way to Samuel and they say, man, we don't have a king and things are bad. Give us a king. And their king was supposed to be God all along. So we see this kinglessness resulting in them looking more and more like the world. Now, so far, the book of Judges has primarily focused on the judges. We've basically been talking about the famous people the whole time. We've been talking about all the names, all the big names throughout the book of Judges. But we're going to make a shift now. In the last 5 chapters, they're going to be about the common people. We're going to talk about all the normal people living in Israel and what was going on with them during the time of the Judges. The first 2 chapters that we're going to do today, 17 and 18, are on the Danites, and 19 through 21 are on the Benjamites. And what we're going to see is not just this personal degradation of the judges, we're going to see the nation going downhill. And we're going to see it in two ways. When we look at the Danites, we're going to see a religious downhill slope. We're going to see how they gave up true worship of the true God. And then over the next 2 weeks, we'll talk about the Benjamites, and we're going to see a moral slide downhill as their actions and their sins became out of control, and they began to do what the book will say as they wanted, as what they saw right. Okay? So, lots of evil has been done in the world in the name of God. Lots of evil. It's been blamed on God that, well, God told me to do this. There have been cults, there have been serial killers that told people that God told them to kill people. Listen, just as a baseline, God does not ever tell us to do something that is contrary to His Word. That's a baseline. And what we're going to see today is not only we're going to watch as the Danites do this, the tribe of Dan does this, but we're also going to see how we do this. See, because it's easy to look at a guy like Jim Jones and think, well, I'm not a cult leader. I'm not taking people away from the church and committing mass suicide, right? But it doesn't have to happen on this mass scale for the reality to be that in our own lives, we are shaping Christianity in our image instead of letting Christianity shape us in God's image. We're not becoming Christ-like. We're redefining Christ-likeness to be whatever we already are. We use Christianity to serve what we're already doing. So the first thing we're going to see, the first step to blaming God for our choices, is to create a personal religion. And the first element of a personal religion is you got to be righteous. You got to have your own righteousness. Because if you don't have your own righteousness, how can you create a religion wrapped around you? Right? So we have to justify ourselves and be righteous. Look with me, if you will. Judges chapter 17, starting in verse 1. Now there was a man of the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Micah. And he said to his mother, the 1,100 pieces of silver that were taken from you, about which you uttered a curse, and also spoke it in my hearing, behold, the silver is with me, I took it. And his mother said, Blessed be my son by the Lord. Then he returned the 1,100 pieces of silver to his mother, and his mother said, I wholly consecrate the silver from my hand to the Lord for my son, to make a carved image and a cast metal image. So now I will return them to you. So when he returned the silver to his mother took 200 pieces of silver and gave them to the silversmith, who made them into a carved image and a cast metal image, and they were in the house of Micah. And the man Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod and household idols, and consecrated one of his sons so that he might become his priest. In those days there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. All right, so we're starting off with this guy named Micah, who clearly has questionable moral character, because the opening scene is him going to his mom and saying, I stole that 1,100 pieces of silver that you were missing. It was me. Here's it back, right? It is a lot of money. As a matter of fact, it's the equivalent of what each of the Philistine leadership gave to Delilah to betray Samson. So this is a wealthy woman, right? And it seems clear that the son doesn't give this money back because he just knows it's right. He gives it back because she basically has put a curse on this money. And in ancient Near Eastern culture, this would have been like anybody who would have thought they had cursed money would have said, I got to get rid of this money. This is tainted money now, right? So it would have been a common action for him to have heard that curse and said, okay, I got to get rid of it. So he goes and takes it back to his mom. And his mom immediately shows us the Canaanization of Israel, because she says, we're going to dedicate this to the Lord by building an idol. It doesn't even make sense, right? And what we see here, she clearly doesn't think this is wrong. She's not actively going, I'm going to worship God with the creation of an idol, even though I know God doesn't like that. She seems to think that this is a totally appropriate reality. Why? Because she doesn't know God. She doesn't know God's character. She doesn't know that God is not going to be happy with this. And we're going to see that theme continue through this chapter 17 of just not even understanding the irony that they're trying to honor God really by just kind of tailoring Him into what they're already doing and the sin they already have. They begin to mimic and mix the proper worship of God with sin. They mix Yahweh worship with cult worship, and they create all the imagery given to you in verse 5 about what He makes is, He makes a cult shrine. He builds a spot where people can come worship, essentially worship Yahweh, but they think they're worshiping Yahweh in the form of this cast idol. He's mimicking all of the elements that we've seen in Scripture about how the Israelites were supposed to worship, but He's doing it to a false image, which is against the commandments, right? So, the point I want to make here is that we have to know the Word. Do you know that not understanding the Word is why the prosperity gospel thrives? Because people preach that God has somewhere in here has told me that if I just believe enough, I'm going to get cars and money and be healthy. It doesn't say that. It actively says the opposite of that, by the way. It says that things are going to be rough and that God is the only way we're going to get through it. Right? How do you think there's a movement in the church today that justifies practicing homosexuality while also being a Christian? It's because they're shaping Christianity into their image, and it comes from not acknowledging what the Word of God actually says, not acknowledging who God really is. And then verse 6 is the point of the entire book of Judges. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Look at verse 7. Now there was a young man from Bethlehem in Judah, of the family of Judah, who was a Levite, and he was staying there. Then the man left the city, Bethlehem in Judah, to stay wherever he would find a place. And as he made his journey, he came to the hill country of Ephraim, to the house of Micah. Micah said to him, "Where do you come from?" And he said to him, "I am a Levite from Bethlehem in Judah, and I am going to stay wherever I may find a place." Micah then said to him, "Stay with me, and be a father and a priest to me, and be a father and a priest to me, and I will give you 10 pieces of silver, a supply of clothing, and your sustenance." So the Levite went in, and the Levite agreed to live with the man, and the young man became to him like one of his sons. So Micah consecrated the Levite, and the young man became his priest, and lived in the house of Micah. Then Micah said, "Now I know that the Lord will prosper me, because I have a Levite as a priest." You guys see the theme? You see this just total lack of understanding of what they're doing, being actually opposed to who God is? See, first of all, what you need to know is what a Levite is. The Levites were the tribe that stood with Moses at the foot of Mount Sinai when the golden calf was created. The Levites, they rallied to God instead of rallying to idolatry. So they were rewarded by being told that they would be the priesthood. They would be the people that got to serve God in the temple, and as such, their allotment throughout the land of Israel was scattered. It wasn't like a tribal land. It was that they got cities throughout the land because the Levites ministered to all of the tribes of Israel. Now, the thing that's almost scary about the way we read this passage is when we read what the Levite is up to, it doesn't faze us at all. He's, trying to figure out where he's going to live and trying to figure out what he's going to do with his life and looking for an opportunity. That sounds normal. Here's the problem. It's not. That's in there intentionally because the Levite is just doing his own thing instead of actively asking God for God's will, seeking God, going to the places where God has told him to be. The Levites had specific areas that they were supposed to minister to, specific places they were supposed to live and be, and this guy's just wandering. He's actively not seeking God's will. And the fact that we can read that and miss that point is actually, it's an indictment of our own spirits because we're not often seeking God's will for our life. We're just kind of strolling about, hoping kind of the next opportunity presents itself. If it's not sinful, then it must be good, right? So then, then we get to the end of this portion. He gets hired as a priest by Micah, who again is creating this personal religion. He's creating this self-righteous situation. And what does he say at the end? Now I know that the Lord will prosper me because I have a Levite as a priest. All right. First problem I want to point out with that sentence is, now I know that the Lord will prosper me. See, for him, God is a means to an end. For him, worshiping God is about being prosperous. It's not about having God, having a relationship with God. Right? And then the other thing is, I want you to take out what he says about having a Levite as a priest and just change the sentence to sound like this. Now I know that the Lord will prosper me because I insert holy act. That's what we do. That's our self-righteousness. I know that God's going to take care of me because I go to church. I know that God's going to take care of me because I read the Bible. Hey, I'm even going to Sunday school. Not everyone goes to Sunday school. Just saying. See what I'm saying? It's not insert holy act here. Now God's obligated to bless me because I'm doing such good righteous things. That's not the way this works. Listen, I want you guys to come to Sunday school, but I want you to be here not because you're checking some kind of holiness block. I want you to be here because we seek God in His Word and we try to know Him. We try to learn who He is and understand Him better. That's why I want you to be here. And then after you have your own righteousness, now you can start figuring out what your blessings are going to be. Now, you've established your personal religion. You got step one out of the way. I'm righteous. Now I've got my holy acts. Now I got to get my blessings. I got to figure out what my blessings are. Look at chapter 18, verse 1. In those days there was no king of Israel, and in those days the tribe of the Danites was seeking an inheritance for themselves to live in. For until that day an inheritance had not been allotted to them as a possession among the tribes of Israel. So the sons of Dan sent from their family 5 men out of the whole number, valiant men from Zorah and Eshtaol, to spy out the land and explore it. And they said to them, Go explore the land. And they came to the hill country of Ephraim, to the house of Micah, and stayed overnight there. When they were near the house of Micah, they recognized the voice of the young man, the Levite, and they turned aside, where they said to him, Who brought you here? And what are you doing in this place? And what do you have here? He said to them, Micah has done this and that for me, and he has hired me, and I have become his priest. Then they said to him, Inquire of God, please, that we may know whether our way on which we are going will be successful. And the priest said to them, Go in peace. Your way in which you are going has the Lord's approval. So first thing I want to point out is that we see the refrain again, right? Verse 1. In those days there was no king in Israel. Right? So we're back to this theme of no, but there's a reason that it's here again this quickly. We're getting a connection because we're supposed to pick up on certain elements from chapter 17 and put them into chapter 18. So the elements that we saw in the first time was that after God had been mixed with idol worship, we got the refrain that there was no king in Israel. And then right after that, God's opinions are assigned to him. They say, well, they commit this mixture of Yahweh worship, and then we have the refrain, and then they say, well, God must think this about us. God must want to prosper us. He must be happy with us now, right? So now when we get the refrain again, what we're going to see is it's setting the stage for God to be mixed with the Danites' own plans, their own way that they want to work through something. They're trying to mix in God's opinion to their plans, and then the idea they get, they're going to blame on God. They're going to say, clearly God wants this to happen. Clearly God is the reason that we're going to go do what we're about to go do. And we see the Danites, they come into the picture, and they are searching for an inheritance. Now this doesn't make sense. Because at the end of Joshua, everyone, we've conquered the land, we go into Judges, and we're still kind of figuring out the conquering of the land. But I'm going to read just from chapter 1, verse 34. Then the Amorites forced the sons of Dan into the hill country, for they did not allow them to come down to the valley. Yet the Amorites persisted in living in the Mount Erez. But the power of the house of Joseph grew strong. They became forced labor. So the point is, the Danites actually failed to take the inheritance that God had given them. But I want you to notice something. Were they given an inheritance by God? Yes. They've already been given an inheritance. So they're out here they're not instead pursuing in faith the inheritance God had already given them. They're trying to find their own blessings. They're deciding what they want. They're not going after the thing that they've actually been told by God is for them. We do this all the time. We set the priorities for what we want. We set the priorities for what God should be giving us, what God's gonna bless me with. And sometimes we're missing out on the thing God has already told us that we can have. And then we get to the Levite. They say, "How are you here? What's going on? What are you doing here?" And what does he say? He doesn't say, "Well, God has really blessed me." He says, "No, Micah has blessed me." Right? See what I'm talking about? We're shaping Yahweh worship around Micah and around the Levite. We're not shaping Yahweh worship around the one true God. And then when the Danites hear this, they go, "Well, while we're at it, why don't we ask God what He thinks?" Listen, this chapter, these two chapters are just like point by point how we handle God so much of the time. While I'm already doing what I'm going to do anyway, I guess I should just listen to a podcast on a sermon and just see what God has to say about it. Right? And then, do you know what the Levite actually says? I don't like the way the NASB Bible translate this. It's in the NASB it says, "has the Lord's approval." The verse should actually be translated, it's a little bit more accurate to say, your plan is before the Lord. Okay. You ever wonder have you ever watched one of those television preachers that says they can predict the future, or do you ever wonder how people get their tarot cards or palms read or anything like that? It's the most generic information you've ever seen. Someone in this room has an uncle whose name starts with A, B, C, D. Somebody goes, "Oh, D! My uncle's name is Dan." Yeah, I knew it. It's the most generic thing you can possibly have. That's what the Levite does right here. He says, your plans are before the Lord. Yeah, no, duh. God can see everything. He's not giving them a approval from God, but that's actually how they take it. They're looking for a positive confirmation. Often we go, Lord, please bless what I'm already planning on doing, and I know that this is definitely what you want because it's not sinful. And then we move on. And it's that's not seeking God. That's not looking for God's opinion. And that's what the Danites are doing. They're like, "Hey, while we're at it, can you check with God for us? Let us know what He says." And He says, "God sees you." And they go, "Awesome, God sees us. We're good to go. We can just automatically do what we want." They've set their own blessings. They don't know how to evaluate the message they get or the messenger. Why? Because they don't know God. They don't know who God is, so they can't tell. Listen, I hope that this is never the case at Evergreen, but if you ever show up to a Sunday school or a sermon and you hear something that contradicts the Bible, go with the Bible. You don't take the preacher's word. You don't go, "Oh, well, I don't understand it, but I guess that's definitely it." Now, if you need to ask questions, let's talk. Let's have a dialogue. If I say something confusing, I want to help you understand it. But I am not above this. I am trying to discern, to give you this, to grapple with this in a way that you can understand it. But I'm not conforming this to my image. So they can't evaluate the messenger. Well, now, once you've got your righteousness, and once you've got your blessings, now you can get your image. You can get your self-made image, and you can blame everything that you're going to do on it being God's will. We're going to make all of my personal religion definitely what God wanted to happen in the first place. All right, so look with me at chapter 18, verse 7. "So the 5 men departed and came to Laish, and saw the people who were living in security in the way of the Sidonians, quiet and unsuspecting, for there was no oppressive ruler humiliating them for anything in the land. And they were far from the Sidonians and had no dealings with anyone. When they came back to their brothers at Zorah and Eshtaol, their brothers said to them, 'What do you say?' And they said, 'Arise, and let's go up against them. For we have seen the land, and behold, it is very good. And will you sit still? Do not hesitate to go, to enter, to take possession of the land. When you enter, you will come to an unsuspecting people with a spacious land, for God has handed it over to you, a place where there is no lack of anything that is on the earth. Then, from the family of the Danites, from Zorah and from Eshtaol, 600 men armed with weapons of war set out. They went up and camped at Kiriath-Jearim in Judah. Therefore, they called that place Mahane Dan. To this day, behold, it is west of Kiriath-Jearim, and they passed from there to the hill country of Ephraim and came to the house of Micah. Okay. So now, the author, first of all, I want you to note that the author takes special attention to give us a couple elements of how these men at Laish are living. And those elements are interesting because they're all the ways that Israel was supposed to be living in the Promised Land. What have we seen in the book of Judges? They've been oppressed. They've been humiliated. They have had dealings with foreigners, with enemy nations. These men at Laish, these Canaanites, are living the life that God promised Israel because Israel won't obey God. There's a perversion here of the Israelites looking in on essentially a foreign nation who has what they're supposed to have. And they are immediately jealous, and they begin to make their plan. They begin to make their plan, and the best part is that they blame God for their plan. They say, well, we're going to take the land. God's given it to us. God has approved that we're going to take this land and make it our own. It's not even, again, keep in mind, they have an inheritance. They have another land that God has already given them. But they don't want what God's given them. They want this, what they found. They want what the world has. They want what the men in this area have. They want it for themselves. And they're going to take it. And of course, why wouldn't God want that for them? So they immediately assume God's intentions for them into... Hey, let me ask you something. Has God been present in this story yet? He's absent from this entire happening. This is all humans doing human things, and God seems to be nowhere to be found. Now, God is sovereign because a Canaanite tribe is going to get judged through the sinful acts of this Israelite tribe. Micah's going to get judged through the sinful acts of this Israelite tribe. But the reality is God using evil men to judge other evil men, while that's great, their lives are devoid of God's presence. Their lives are missing out on all that God has for them because they won't even take up the inheritance that He's already given them. See, what they're doing is that they've built their own personal religion, their own personal God. They've formed their faith in their image. And now they're blaming it on God, just like Jim Jones. Jim Jones formed Christianity in his image, and he blamed it on God. And then, after you've established your own personal religion, you have to use your own personal strength to keep it there, because God won't support your personal religion. So we see personal strength as we have to summon all of our might to make something happen. Look at chapter 18, starting in verse 14. Then the 5 men who went to spy out the country of Laish said to their kinsmen, "Do you know that there are in these houses an ephod and household idols and a carved image and a cast metal image? Now then, consider what you should do." So they turned aside there and came to the house of the young man, the Levite, to the house of Micah, and asked him how he was doing. Meanwhile, the 600 men, armed with their weapons of war, who were the sons of Dan, were positioned at the entrance of the gate. Now the 5 men who went out to spy the land went up and entered there. They took the carved image, the ephod, and the household idols, and the cast metal image, while the priest was standing at the entrance of the gate, and the 600 men armed with weapons of war. When these men entered Micah's house and took the carved image and the ephod, household idols, and the cast metal image, the priest said to them, "What are you doing?" And they said to him, "Be silent, put your hand over your mouth, and go with us, and be to us a father and a priest. Is it better for you to be a priest to the house of one man, or a priest to a tribe and a family in Israel?" And the priest's heart was glad, and he took the ephod, the household idols, and the carved image, and went among the people. What are we seeing here? Greed, theft, strong-arm robbery, even like blackmail. If you think about 600 men standing outside your home with weapons, saying like, you're coming with us or else, and we're bringing all this stuff with us. The Levite shows his character immediately. He is more concerned with promotion, with wealth, with fame. Listen, he's been living in this guy's house. He says, this guy's done everything for me. And then the very next section, he says, oh, more money? More respect? Higher position? Oh, awesome. I'll grab my stuff. Grabs all the carved images, goes with them. He's not a man of God. He doesn't stand for what God stands for. He's looking for the best opportunity available. Is that your life? Is your life just a series of waiting for your big break, for the American dream to kick in? Or is your life about being with Jesus, being with God? Are you looking to know Him? That's the difference. Look at verse 21. Then they turned and left and put the children, the livestock, and the valuables in front of them. When they had distanced themselves from Micah's house, the men who were in the house near Micah's house assembled by command and overtook the sons of Dan. Then they called out to the sons of Dan, who turned around and said to Micah, "What is the matter with you, that you have assembled together?" And he said, "You have taken my gods, which I have made, and the priest, and have gone away. What more do I have? So how can you say to me, 'What is the matter with you?'" Then the sons of Dan said to him, "Do not let your voice be heard among us, or else fierce men will attack you, and you will lose your life and the lives of your household." So the sons of Dan went on their way, and when Micah saw that they were too strong for him, he turned and went back to his house. First of all, I want you to notice that they put the baggage train in front. That's not how anybody traveled to war in ancient times. You didn't put your women and children in the front. They were anticipating conflict coming from behind them. They knew that what they had just done was going to be contested. They prepared for it. So they put their women and children and their baggage in front, and their warriors stay behind, so they're ready to confront Micah when he catches up to them. I want you to notice that in the book of Judges, we've seen this decline. We've seen them, if you remember, the very first oppressor in the book of Judges was a foreign power from far away that was like a mighty power. The next oppressor was their next door neighbor that they thought of as the fatties, right? That's kind of how they treated I think it was the Edomites, or I can't remember, but their next door neighbors that they were like, oh, the fat dumb people next door, right? Then it becomes the Canaanites, the people in the land that they should have kicked out, and then it was Abimelech, one of their own leaders, right? Now it's their own people. They are the oppressors of themselves. This is what their sin has done. It has degraded their nation all the way to the point where it no longer takes a superpower to bring oppression to their lands. They're doing it to themselves. They're eating each other. This is not how God's people are supposed to act. This is not what loving your neighbor looks like. It's just might makes right. And what did Micah's gods do for him? Nothing. He says it right there. He says, "You took the gods which I have made." Couldn't stand up for themselves. They couldn't protect him. They didn't stop what was happening. This is the thing about sin, is we build it up and we insulate ourselves in this life that we've created for ourselves, and when it starts falling apart, you know what it does to preserve itself? Nothing. Nothing. It's the exact image of building your house on the sand. If you build your house on the sand, then when the waves come, it will wash away. And you know what? The waves come. Anybody in this room just like, I've never had waves. My life's going great. It's going great That doesn't even make sense. That's not real. There are waves. There's always going to be waves. But are you going to be insulated with God because He's unshakable by waves? Or are you going to be insulated by sin because sin breaks up at the first sign of struggle? See, people like Jim Jones, people of the world, they bully, they manipulate, they force what they want to happen. That's what the Danites are doing right now. But Jesus is gentle. He's loving. He's caring. He calls to us. He seeks us out. See how that's the exact opposite picture? Are you becoming more Christ-like, more gentle? Are you seeking people in love? Or are you becoming harsher, more determined, a bully? Because that's not forming yourself to Christ's image. This is where we can see that they're acting like the world, and yet they're gonna attach everything they do to God's name. Well, we're a tribe of Israel. We have a Levite. We're God's people. Right? Just attaching these things to yourself. It's the equivalent of my favorite example of just like putting like a Bible verse in your Instagram bio. That doesn't cut it. That's not knowing God. That's just a sham. That's an outward Now, I'm not saying don't put a verse in your Instagram bio. Right? By all means, put a verse there. But if that's what your faith is built on, it doesn't cut it. That's not what gets you to God. So we see that we've created a personal religion and we're upholding it with our personal strength, and it's going to lead us to one place: personal sin. See, sin is slavery and emptiness. So if you live in your own personal strength and you end up in your own personal sin and you're empty, don't turn around and blame God for that. Don't turn around when the consequences finally hit you and say, this is all on God. This is somehow God's fault. Look at verse 27. Then they took what Micah had made and the priest who had belonged to him and came to Laish, to a people quiet and unsuspecting, and struck them with the edge of the sword, and they burned the city with fire, and there was no one to save them, because it was far from Sidon. And they had no dealings with anyone, and it was in the valley which was near Beth Rahab. So they rebuilt the city and lived in it. And they named the city Dan, after the name of Dan, their father, who was born to Israel. However, the name of the city was previously Laish. The sons of Dan set up for themselves the carved image, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, he and his sons were priests to the tribe of the Danites until the day of the captivity of the land. So they set up for themselves Micah's carved image, which he had made all the time that the house of God was in Shiloh. Personal sin. They commit idolatry. They commit murder. What do they look like? They look like Canaanites. You could have ripped this story out of a Canaanite history book and it would have been the same outcome, the same process. Idolatry, murder, might makes right. That's what the Canaanites did. And the Canaanites did all the time. They attached it to Baal. Baal wants this, Baal wants that. Of course, Baal's doing stuff. We see in Samson, they defeat Samson, and then as an afterthought, they go, yeah, Baal did that. Baal helped us defeat Samson. And that's exactly how the Israelites are acting in this moment. They're getting everything they wanted, and notice the only thing that's missing, they even said everything's in the land, everything you could want. What's missing from the land? God. If you gain the whole world and you miss out on God, you have nothing. You have only a life that's going to burn up on the last day and leave you empty-handed. See, I don't care what you want, what you think you want, what you're trying to gain. See, what did the people of Jonestown end up with? A 900-person mass suicide? All of their dreams, this perfect communal situation where they were just going to create this utopia and bliss. And they all ended up dead together with nothing. That is your life when it's based in sin. When it's based in Christianity in your image and not in God's image. Are you headed towards death? Are you in rebellion to the king and somehow blaming the king? Right? Because the book of Judges is about how we need a king. The only option is to submit to that king and let him take care of your life. I want you to remember that Jesus said he was the way, the truth, the life. There's no life apart from God. There's no truth apart from God. There's no way to God apart from Jesus. There's one way. There's not multiple. You can't just worship any religion. You can't just act any old way. Now, how we act doesn't get us to heaven, but the point is, does your action reflect that you believe in the one true God? Are you following the one true God? Because no amount of personal strength can get you into heaven. You can't bully God. You're not going to bully God out of the way of the pearly gates. If you've been barred, you're not getting in. Quit living however you want to and calling it Christianity. Well, I go to church. So did Jim Jones and all of his followers. They all went to church before he started the People's Temple. So just being here doesn't do anything. I read the Bible some. Enough to know God? Enough to spot the false message? To evaluate the messenger and the message? And understand who God truly is? Well, God wants me to do this. Listen, God will hold you accountable for the things that you do in His name. And if you live a sinful life and just attach God to it, there's going to be a day where you have to face Him and He's going to ask you about that. Seek the King so that you can know Him, so that you can have a relationship with Him. Listen, the book of Judges, what I've struggled to do towards the end of this book, because it gets so bad, like obviously bad. And what I've struggled to do is paint the picture for you guys that you don't get to look at the last chapters in Judges and go, glad I'm not like that. You are like this. That's the point. Like, and I'm glad that you're, like, this is the group, right? Like, you're in the room, preaching the choir to an extent, right? But the key is, am I knowing God enough that I'm rooting out the evil in my life, that I'm rooting out the tendencies of sin that are natural to all man? Like, this is what we look like without God. Now, if you're walking with God, like if you're sold out and you're conforming yourself to Christ's image, that's great. I mean, truly. There's freedom in that, there's life in that, there's joy in that. So what parts of you aren't conforming to that? This week, I found parts of me that I said, that's not Christ. That's not who Christ wants me to be. That's who I want me to be. And because it's not inherently sinful, I just keep doing it. But the process is that I'm constantly seeking to root out the evil that is natural, that is in my flesh. Because I love the name of Jesus. And that's what I want for you guys, is that freedom that's found there. So don't get into the last chapters of Judges. It gets dark, by the way. If you want to read ahead, the next couple chapters are dark. But we don't get to look at those chapters and go, man, those guys suck. This is a view into our own souls.
Hey guys, this is Philip Jackson, pastor to young adults at Evergreen Baptist Church. I want to invite you to come to Reach. We meet every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. at Evergreen Church in South Tulsa, just east of Mingo on 111th Street. The mission of Reach Tulsa is to cultivate a young adult community that's defined by real transformation and the sincere pursuit of a godly life through training in biblical disciplines, personal development, and intentionally transitioning into independence as mature members of the body of Christ. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like and subscribe to our content. We're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Reach Young Adult Ministry is a part of Evergreen Baptist Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma. For more information and additional lessons, please visit our website, evergreenbc.org.